All right, welcome everyone. We're Semblance of Sanity. I'm Caleb.
I'm Jacob.
And we're here for Legend of the Galactic Heroes, episode 56.
The orders to Mercats have been given, and Poplin has tried to play wingman for Julian. But also, Yang is under surveillance. Very obvious surveillance. Him and Greenhill can't get a moment's peace. No, not at all. Not at all. Can't have that. Nope.
Yeah. And forces are at work moving behind Reinhardt's back.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a setup, a plot.
The Church of Terra is trying to use Kummel, and now Mariendorf's dad is wanting her to set up Reinhardt and her cousin to be together.
Yeah. There's a loose connection there, but we'll see where it pans out.
Right.
But this is basically the time where Reinhardt can solidify his grasp on the galaxy as a whole. And then the question is, are we going to get into the moment-by-moment detail politics and all that?
Right. And what does that entail?
Or are we going to time skip a little bit?
I feel like we could do a bit of a montage. There is the whole mission to Terra that Julian and
Julian is going.
And apparently Poplin too, because he is thirsty. But so that will have to be, gone into in probably some amount of detail. But yeah, it doesn't seem like there's too much happening in the galaxy at the moment, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
War. It's over. For
now.
So y'all, without further ado, let's get into it. All right, everyone, now be sure to go check out the reaction portion of the video in the description below, then come back here for the discussion. Well, we got some history dumped on us.
All right. I feel
We've already
like
done this once before.
We have?
Which is showing how the Galactic Empire, the Galactic Federation, or whatever, and the
Alliance formed. Right, which was, great to know. But now that Julian's going to be going to Terra, it's important to learn that Earth history. Yeah. Especially considering that now we start to see a bit more of a definitive pattern, with how things have gone with humanity in the millennia, or the centuries, that the show has covered.
Right.
And given where Reinhardt's at, it's rather apropos to have that be brought up because he's probably going to go the way of the Golden Bomb at some point. But
yeah, he is an equivalent of, what was the guy that died at 42?
Oh, yeah.
What was the guy? Let me find him here. He was one of
Townsend,
the four.
Or no?
He was one of the four people that was. I think it was Palmgren.
No, I think it was Townshend.
Or no.
Oh, okay.
No, it was.
Oh no, yeah,
Palmgren.
right. That was the one that. Yeah. He died, and then Townshend was the one that took over afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Palmgren was basically worried that if he didn't basically live a little bit longer, then he wouldn't be able to solidify the unity of the people, and thus they would turn to violence and disarray and chaos.
Which is funny because he said, I only need 5 more years. Now, granted, that was 2 years into it, but Mercats was saying, ideally we would want 5 or 6 years of nothing happening.
I mean, that's,
Like, and
it doesn't,
time about matching up, and then, but no, right about this point, Church of Terra is starting to do stuff, probably. So, yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that goes. But,
yeah. So with us getting to basically have a little bit of a study point in history, it's good to acknowledge basically what this episode is. This is not a typical episode of an anime or a show. And this is something that reads more like a book. This is something that is actually reading more like a textbook.
Yeah, in fact, or keep going.
In that this is just something that needs to be judged as such and, kind of understand that this show is one that is based around communicating the idea that humanity has come a long way, and yet we need to be willing to look back so that we can learn from our mistakes and thus apply the knowledge that our ancestors and just those before us maybe did or didn't figure out.
And by the way, I want to point out that this is almost the textbook definition of what not to do in a story or a book. The reason why it works is because of how good the execution is and how closely it ties to the themes of the greater story. Because the fact that the way that history goes like this and stuff, we can see the similarities to, like this is fairly plausible as a future history, right? So seeing it unfold, it's like, oh man, I hoped that wouldn't have happened, but yeah, that that does kind of make sense, right?
Yeah. So let's kind of go over it rather quickly. Nuclear war happens.
Yep.
Of
13
course,
days,
everything
done. Yep.
Everything goes to shit after that.
A billion people left.
But basically, what happens then on out for the next, few centuries and such is basically this cycle of human beings forming governments, forming groups, basically, to figure out ways to basically keep everything from going into full-blown chaos.
Right.
And every
Bring order out
time
of
that
it.
that happens, there is a mini bit of expansion and progress for humanity as a
Yep.
whole. What I really want to bring up that's rather interesting is that the scale of the violence in some ways precedes the scale at which humanity rebounds. The war, the 13th-day war, basically reduced, human population to 1 billion when it was probably closer to like 15 billion at the time there, depending on how population stuff
Right.
went in this AU.
But
of
even if
Earth.
it was only like 10 or 12 billion, that's still, a small fraction of the population that's left after that.
Yeah. But basically, humanity was nearly wiped out.
Yep.
Then, after 90 years of chaos, which is important to recognize here, that's how long it took for a united Earth government to form after we nearly just had all of humanity wiped out, after our single point of failure was destroyed. And this is, in some ways, I like this history, the AU future, if you will.
Right.
Being way more pessimistic, I would say, than a lot of people probably are, because there's a limit with regards to the scope of this story's basis for certain technological advancements. It seems based in a story, someone who's got the mind of a sci-fi writer from 30 years ago or 40 years ago,
Sure.
right? Like the books that these were based on the mind of someone who doesn't look at the way technology has advanced and humanity has done there. And I would say it's still even more pessimistic than where a lot of our future is probably going just as a species in general.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of one of the wonderful things I think about sci-fi is that it's taking everything and scaling it up to the extreme, right? So this isn't necessarily the way that things are going to go for humanity as we know it, but they could theoretically. This is a dark spin on it, and then it can kind of become that sort of cautionary tale.
Right. But I'm not talking about how this relates to like the possibilities of it basically relating to there. I'm just talking about that it's the pessimistic side of things is that this then perpetuates a cycle.
Oh,
this is something
gotcha.
that like the scale is I say it's kind of it's whatever, but the idea then that at this point it takes from then 2129 with the basically the Earth government being formed. It then takes all this time of us basically focusing on developing warp drive technology to where we can actually get this to work. And this feels like the optimistic side of things here.
Right, where
is that because we have this focus, everyone basically abandons the idea of war in basically terms of, hey, let's get to this point where we can get this technological advancement, we can have something other than Earth as a single point of failure. But this isn't considered the golden age of humanity right here by the historians of Legend of the Galactic Heroes.
Yeah, that is interesting.
It's when the Galactic Federation is formed 400 years later?
Yeah.
In 2801. Back here in, the year 2400 and such, 2391, that's when warp drive technology actually gets perfected and we get the next habitable planet in some kind of Goldilocks zone or something like that. That's like the part where I feel that like, that makes it feel real, I guess, is the idea that this backstory of humanity feels extremely pessimistic and extremely optimistic, that after nuclear war we would actually find a way to rebound this well, basically.
Yeah.
And yet still 400 years later, or more about 200 years later, we go through the same damn mistakes all over again.
Right. Because the price that was basically paid up front of the nuclear war and then 90 years of chaos, right? Which, chaos, just insert, post-apocalyptic, right? Like,
scenario there.
Just people dying left and right? That after that, people would be probably sick enough of war that they would, it would stop for at the very least a while, right? It's the this is
at least a while, like
no, very very general terms there.
Right, but like that kind of hope that humanity would actually get tired of war.
Yeah, I mean, they need to rest up and recover, and then they're ready to go at it again. But like this is a maybe a slightly cold comparison to make, but this feels like the equivalent of okay, you get a test and you get one problem wrong. You're like, all right, I'll go back and look at that. But I did pretty good, all things considered. I don't need to learn too much from this. I just need to tweak this little thing here, right? You get a test back and it's like 4 out of 100. It's like, oh, only 1 billion people left? Oh, we really fucked this up then, didn't we? All right, maybe we do need to, shift mindsets and such, do whatever needs to be done and to make sure that doesn't happen again. But then, of course, that was hundreds of years ago. We don't have to deal with that anymore.
Yeah. It's just kind of like crazy to think about the fact that like the humans of Legend of the Galactic Heroes present timeline almost never mentioned the 13 Days War.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's just something.
Yeah, it was only brought up like when the nukes were actually used by the nobles.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right, because if you think about it, it totally makes sense. Like looking at a timeline in this montage episode, right? Mm-hmm. It seems like it's so close together, but if really a person, what's the saying? Like that basically lessons will only last like a couple generations. Like that if you learn something, right? Mm-hmm. Like I think wealth is often the example that's used of this. Like that wealth usually only lasts in a family like a couple generations. That you can teach something to your child, right? That you learned, right? Maybe you came from some certain environment or background or whatever. You learned some really important lessons that helped you succeed in life. And then you teach that to your child. They learn it from their parent. They're like, oh, okay, cool. When they then go to teach it to their child, there isn't that same level of conviction because they didn't experience it, right? It's too many layers of indirection. You go to 200 years later, where that's how many generations, and the lessons will be all but gone.
Yeah, I just feel like that's the part where the pessimism comes in. Is that with the level of technology resetting probably so many times here, specifically with things like the 13 Days of War. It seems like everything that at that point that would have happened would have been focused entirely on the idea of actually laying a hold to everything from here on out being all we have left.
Oh, sure.
So thus, the attention to history, because essentially everything before that is irrelevant. It got neutralized. It got completely blasted away. And
blank slate.
Yeah, humanity basically got a chance to try again. And the thing that ends up being the part that stagnates it is that the UEG sphere of influence reached its limit due to the limitation of warp tech with a radius of 60 light years centered on Earth. If they had just found a way to basically be like, all right, base out there in Sirius, let's go light years and radius of direction from there, see what we can go from there, and then basically bunny hop the whole way through, it would have led to probably some kind of sovereign nations of sorts forming in the way that it had prior, basically, with just human beings discovering, areas and stuff and then separating and forming into groups. And yes, that would have eventually led to a war again. But it's just kind of crazy to think about the fact that there was this desire for things to be basically perfectly secure and such that like the Space Defense Corps forming.
Oh yeah.
Like
right. It's a sort of dictatorship in a way, because even if it's not controlled by one person, it's controlled by one entity, and it's that monopoly thing, right?
Right.
Whereas like
here's what they started it as: the Ministry of Space's Navigational Space Safety Department reorganized into the Department of Public Peace, and then Department of Public Peace reorganized into the Space Defense Corps.
Yeah.
And then the Space Defense Corps reorganized into the Space Force.
Yep.
Like you can see that this took a large period of time.
Department of Public Peace to Space Force.
This happened over the course of 80 years.
Right. So, 3 solid generations probably. But still, that's just, and then it took 40 years from the Space Force being, organized to basically then people being like, whoa.
the amount of budget and money being spent on this is actually creating a sort of nobility of sort.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then another 40 years later, yeah.
God. And
Yeah, like
yeah.
I believe this. Like,
Yeah, I believe it
like
too.
if I were to be time traveled somehow to like 1,000 years in the future, right?
Yeah.
And then someone were to basically show me this episode and be like,
This is what happened.
this is what happened. It's, you know, it's done with like characters as a way to make it more palatable for teaching the kids, but this is what happened.
Right.
I would have believed it.
Yeah,
like,
I would have too.
like,
Yeah, because it's the
man.
equivalent of right now 3108, I believe. Oh wait, hold on. No.
No.
It's actually even later than that.
Oh yeah, it's quite a bit later.
Oh, it's quite a bit later. Hold on. No. It's the equivalent of, we're going all the way into the current time. It's about the year 3600.
Right.
Oh my God. So it's
Yep.
been
Uh-huh.
1600 years basically.
Yep. Holy shit.
Wow.
Yeah. In every age, you know, like
Yeah, exactly. So let's go into the era where things started to basically go into full on out revolution between Earth, though, and
the colonies.
the colonies. Yeah.
Yeah, because that was something where I'm really glad that they went into specific detail of like events, people's stories and events that caused this to happen, because that's important to hear, I feel like, because it's very easy to just hear like, oh, okay, this stuff happened and then revolution, they turned against each other, there you go.
Well, yeah.
But getting into the nitty gritty of like, no, they actually were afraid of it happening, so they launched this, you know, kind of smear campaign thing against one of the colonies to be like, they're so bad. But then that actually ended up just rallying people to that colony to fight the bad stuff that was going on.
Right.
And then it just kept escalating from there.
Yeah, the idea that Earth created its own enemies in this aspect feels just so apropos for
Oh yeah,
humanity
it's totally
to do that.
poetic. Yeah.
But I love the idea also that one of the things that made the Empire seem like something that formed out of a chaos that I didn't understand the origins of was that the age of basically rampant corruption and chaos and piracy of the like that the Empire basically formed to protect people against was basically the remnants of the
Centuries old.
public Ministry of Peace that was
Turned
put in
into-
place after a full-on nuclear war
Right.
that eventually over the course of generations or maybe even over a century turned into basically a rampant military piracy splinter group that just did as it willed. And I really like the attention to this, because one of the things that is a constant point of conflict I've had just talking with people about history and stuff like that is there's this idea of the importance of armies, basically the importance of why basically a military is needed on like a fundamental level. And a lot of the stuff that this history goes into brings up the issues of where it can be useful and where it can just lead to just the worst aspects of humanity. And the fact that things went this wrong, and the reason why they did was because of a lack of human imagination, in that we, on some level, think so small at times to basically say, like, this is how bad things can get because you put too much power in one area, in one group, in one... Yeah. Call me a pessimist then, but I just feel like if you're not a student of even our own history, you think that this part is the pessimistic part. I feel like the pessimistic part is just the fact that some of the things even started to begin with. And then the optimistic part is that we actually rebounded from it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's the suppose that these sorts of things take root in the first place, right? Because that's, small beginnings, it's easy to buy, right?
Yeah.
You know, but you know, suppose that happened, it's fairly plausible
Yes.
that given enough time and just, you know, decay and all of that stuff, that it would turn to these different areas, which is like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Totally.
And then very bad things happen, but humanity does manage to survive. Mother Nature, well, no, well, yeah.
Yeah, nothing to do with Mother Nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing to do with that. Just people are resilient, yes, but like what is it? A human being is smart and intelligent.
Oh, yeah. No,
An individual.
an individual can be smart, you know, but people are dumb, panicky, and you know it, you know.
Yeah, that was a line from
Men in Black. Yeah, the first
from Men
one.
in Black. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. That's right. And,
Great line.
And basically, what we see here is that every time humanity is rebounded from the point of basically like turning their focus towards like specific things, it leads towards a great era of peace, because humanity is focused and things are basically able to move along in a
Yep.
way to where we don't basically let our greed or desires or specific suspicions turn us against each other. But these are also like, I would say, rather just optimistic cases, because I would say most of the times in those kinds of cases, things just continue to spiral more and more out of control.
Until they get to that point where the bamboo thing fills up with too much water and it tips over, dumps it out, and then it goes back, right? Like,
Yeah.
like, you know how there's that concept of humanity as a whole being basically like a computer?
Oh, okay.
You know, I
Okay,
feel
yeah.
like this is the equivalent of when you take a learning computer program like an AI, right? And you have it just run tests against itself. Right? And it
okay.
literally just does shit and sees what happens, right? And then it holds on to what works and throws away what doesn't, right?
You'd think.
You'd think, you know, but this is, well, sometimes it does things almost exactly the same way
Yeah.
with a slight difference, right? You know?
Right.
But I feel like this is basically taking that process and just blowing it up and zooming in really close,
God.
so that way it's yes, these 400 years or whatever, those are just one little iterative little process, right?
Yeah.
See if humanity can get it right this time. Of course they don't. Or, you know, they get some things right, but, you know, eventually it goes bad. All right, reset, try again.
I love the idea also that they kind of went for the history has deified and, you know, kind of held up these four men to be like the ones that kind of sent humanity on a path towards redemption,
Yep.
revolution, and revivification and such. And it's like, okay, cool. So they set up the rebellion.
Yep.
They send basically you know, the ultimatums. They end up basically figuring out the ways in which they can move things in a better direction.
I believe the ultimatums was early.
Oh, it was earlier.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right. That's right.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. That was about 10 years before. And then Palmgren Townshend, Francoul, and Chow basically end up
Meeting and
they
coordinating
form the
and-
Black Flag Force.
yep.
And basically through extreme competence in very specific areas by being the right people at the right time,
Yep.
they basically reenact basically the same thing, but instead they've flipped the roles, and now we're freeing us from Earth's tyranny, and
Right.
Earth gets reduced to 1 billion people again.
Yep.
And it's like, oh my God, like, is this a cause of a system of government failing? Is this a cause of what happens when people get too much power? Is this a failing of just human nature? Are we doomed to repeat this cycle for eternity? Like,
I mean, for eternity, I don't know about that.
No,
but
because, I
doomed to
mean,
repeat
like-
it.
like-
Absolutely. Like,
for till we actually just die out. You know?
Well, right, and then, you know, it's, yeah. At what point would humanity mess up so completely that they would die out? You know, you'd think it'd be with nukes, but, you know, in this case, the fact that there were 1 billion people left after nuclear war, I would say that's actually quite optimistic. Like,
yeah, I
like-
I would say that in general that's like just something where we can't ever really project what it would be like to have the nations of the world that have nukes all just ended up going
Right.
to war.
like if you look at just like in the U.S., for instance, if you like the 51% of the population being in like 12 cities or something like that, like it, you know,
Yeah.
yeah, it's terrifying what would happen if all the big cities got hit. But like Oh man. Yeah, this was real good.
This feels like, in a lot of ways, some kind of big civilization game where you get to basically see the AU kind of look of what it would be like if we kept going past the Alpha Centauri mission at the end of the game. And basically the optimism of that being like, we broke it through. We got through to space. Now everything's wonderful here, all right? Or, no.
Nope.
No.
Same old game.
Like, I really loved the show The Expanse. Expanse is one of those shows that I feel like does a really cool job of showing, like, what kind of problems arise when you have distance in communication and reliance on basically communicating with different governing bodies across star systems, basically, or the equivalent of the planets. Because if you don't have the ability to send quick kind of bodies of people back and forth between them, like they do in this world with, in this iteration with warp technology and stuff, this kind of stuff is almost inevitable.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
the fact that they actually have warp technology and it still goes this way is like the optimism of we get warp technology, but the pessimism of it still doesn't mean anything because we still lead to probably some of the most like horrific shedding of blood like in human history without the use of WMDs, basically, with the Bloody Night thing. Like the amount of detail the episode went into that.
I like the visuals were disturbing, but I loved the visuals. Like they painted such a vivid picture of the kinds of barbaric things that were happening. Like the idea that you know, the people would end up swallowing valuables like gemstones and things like that.
Those are the soldiers.
Well, no. Yeah, the soldiers would do it too. But yeah, apparently some of the elderly and, you know, and stuff like that, you know, if they had something valuable that they wanted to keep to, you know, just sliced open. I mean, maybe it was just the soldiers, right? And then the civilians were like having like their teeth cut out and things like that, you know.
What I believe happened was that the two parts of the military bumped into each other, both going for looting. Friendly fire ensues. They basically start shooting each other and then leading to a whole bunch of craziness there. And then among the corpses of those two factions, there were many whose abdomens were torn to pieces. There it goes to that it was to loot the diamonds and jewels that the deceased had swallowed. And those civilians this occurred in the hundredfold. The elderlies had their jaws removed with army knives to get at their gold teeth, and women had their whole ears taken for piercings and fingers for rings. Like, this is the kind of stuff where they're basically saying, hey, human beings, like, forget the number for a second there. Like, you're talking about the vivid imagery. This is kind of stuff that doesn't require actually a lot of imagination if you're a student of history. Like,
no. You know, if you had someone that was going around and, you know, pillaging, robbing, whatever, and someone had, like, a little baggie full of diamonds, right, and they swallowed it, I don't doubt for a second that person would cut their throat, open them up, find it, and go, right? Like, that's... Yeah.
It's just something that's kind of disturbing to just take a hard look at, really, not yourself, but just kind of the environment that you live in, and think about basically what kind of circumstances would it take basically for it to erupt into all-out barbarism. Like, what kind of things would need to happen?
Right. And the fact that we're not all killing each other right now, you know, on this scale and things like that is...
We are.
Well...
We are. You're just not experiencing it.
Well, okay. The fact that there is some
not on the
element...
scale, of course, but that's why the scale is something that's kind of a way to distance yourself from it.
Okay, sure. But the idea that humanity at all can have points where it is not in absolute barbarism, that is impressive.
Yeah, it is.
Like, and that's something where, you know, as much as sci-fi is this wonderful cautionary tale a lot of the times, it is also something to, you know, help us appreciate how good we have it in a lot of ways. So, for those of us that do. But
that's kind of the point with this there also, is that there's this absolute barbarism with the idea of there being 1 million people murdered in a night.
But it, you know,
but the actual, like,
percentage-wise,
the actual, like, horrific thing was basically that this was just an instance of an army turned upon a civilian population. Which were like, oh, something of this nature
That never
happens.
happens.
No, that happens
All the time.
All the time.
All the time. Yeah.
All the time.
Well,
you just don't see it.
one of the things that really was just like, oh God, oh wow, like that stood out to me was when they did the Space Force or whatever did the report on it, and at first they deny that it happened, right? And then 3 days later they're like, it did happen, but it was a relatively small amount. Only 20,000 people died, right?
Yeah.
And it's the only 20,000 people, right? Because blown up to scale, right? Because sci-fi, bigger scale for everything. 20,000 is a small number. That's messed up. But then it's like, wait, but that's still just as messed up, even if it were scaled back down to, say,
Yeah.
our day and age.
Yeah, it's kind of episodes and stuff like this where I kind of have to figure out like how I want to approach the discussion angle of it, because it's just kind of depressing and it's not really a story. It's just kind of an exposition dump. Yeah. There's no characters that carry over through the whole thing. It's just a retelling of events,
So yes, in the traditional technical sense, I would say you're absolutely right. But as another potential way of looking at it, this is the story of humanity.
Yeah.
Humanity is the character here, right?
Yeah.
And humanity
You're right.
has learned in some ways, but it hasn't figured it out, right? It is still on its journey, right? And that's why we have this show, Legend of the Galactic Heroes, right? Because the conflict hasn't been resolved, right? And that's the whole point of Yang, wanting to help affect change, but also realizing that he is just one piece in a much larger organism.
Yeah.
And when it comes right down to it, he can hope for the best, he can do everything he can, but his actions won't necessarily change what other people will do.
Yeah, so I just want to bring this into the present because this whole thing is just depressing me. But do you feel like then that this gives us a little bit of insight into the motivations of the Church of Terra? Because I feel like it does.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
The Church of Terra is trying to basically exacerbate the war just in general.
Right. Revenge, basically. Like,
Well,
it's the...
Yeah.
Or an 800-year extension of what the nobles that lost the war with Reinhard are now.
Sure.
Just take that and let it fester.
But they're
for 8
basically
centuries.
a cult.
Yep.
For the purpose of basically bringing about death. Mm-hmm. Which, if we think about it in the context of this, what they're basically saying in their way is just like, probably better if just humanity dies out.
Sure. Or maybe all of humanity except us.
Yeah. I feel like that's almost too
optimistic.
Ambitious. Yeah. Well, the thing is that's too sane.
Yeah.
These kinds of cults and stuff like that, they don't ultimately care about some future or something like that.
Well, there's a part of me that wonders, with the decision to have the Church of Terra be, straight up even just called a cult, right?
Call themselves a church.
Yeah, but call it like it is, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. But how much of that is because they have is it because they look like a cult, or is it basically saying this is something that looks like these other things, but we're going to call this one thing a cult because that's what it is? But then when you see how similar that is to what's happening with the other nations and things like that, like the fact that this could happen with the old imperial nobility, right? That's still essentially...
They just weren't unified.
Sure.
They didn't have a single vision. Church of Terra, I'm sure, is actually pretty unified as far as
definitely.
things go.
Yeah, right. But the idea that because when Terra was brought up and that people still live there, that's the kind of thing where that doesn't seem cultish to me, right? It's just, people live in a place, right?
Oh, yeah.
And,
of course not. No, not everyone on Terra is part of the Church of Terra.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. But the idea that from that sense, the Church of Terra actually just sounds like a dispossessed nation.
I mean,
like that's what it sounds
possibly.
like to me. Yes, they've turned it into a religion and all these things, but it's just a bunch of people that have grouped together and held on to that bitterness for a very long time.
Right. And then what they're doing with it is they're not seeking to create some kind of
they're not
ruling
seeking
body or any kind of sovereign nation necessarily. They're trying to recall, I would say, more people probably to Terra for
Sure.
one. But
Yeah, they can't. Well, they can't be a sovereign ruling
Yeah.
body in this situation. The other parties are too big, right? So
Right.
they need to.
Right, so they're parasiting. Yeah.
Right, they're parasiting. They're
Yeah.
they're trying to incite the big animals to then kill each other, which that is something that I've thought was kind of interesting over the course of this show. The numbers of the armies and things that we've had fighting has steadily grown smaller.
Smaller, yeah.
Right? So it's showing that both sides are kind of being bled dry.
Yep.
And it may come up to a point very soon where the Church of Terror is able to make its move in earnest.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're kind of coming up to that point.
Yeah, I feel like this is the beginnings of that.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
and
Where
thus
they
we
can
need
start to be a
Julian's
little bit
perspective
less
there.
parasitic and more directly autonomous.
Yeah. But God, like this episode just kind of just even thinking about it just got me into
Yeah.
a really bit of a funk. Like one of the things that's really just upsetting in general whenever you're kind of taking a hard look at humanity as like as a species, and
Yeah.
you just kind of are thinking about like what even are we and stuff like that. It's really easy to get into really just depressing, nihilistic kind of thoughts regarding how our future even looks like. And thus, I think a lot of people do tend towards very kind of selfish or, I would say, dramatically selfless acts with regards to that. And yet, the answer has to be somewhere in the middle. The answer has to be somewhere in the balance of that. Otherwise, I think you kind of break a little bit inside just kind of
Sure.
thinking about that.
Well,
Because ultimately, you're a person. You might think of yourself maybe as the, what were these guys? What were these guys named? The Palmgren or the Townshend of Franklin.
Oh, yeah,
LaChapelle.
yeah.
But they didn't know what they were going to do. They
Nope.
didn't know if their efforts were going to
Yeah.
mean anything in the long run.
that they'd
Some
end
of
up
them,
killing each other. Yeah.
yeah, some of them ended up basically turning on each other and killing everyone else.
Yep.
Like,
Even when they weren't directly opposed, like the fact that Chow basically was just like, nah, I'm going to open a music school.
and they're like, no, we have to kill him
No,
just
sorry.
in case he is a threat.
Because, you were really good at that espionage stuff and can't have you around. Like that. Oh, man.
Yeah, this.
But see, and this is the weird thing, but seeing this kind of stuff actually makes me it's disturbing, but it also makes me hopeful. Because this is humanity still trying to figure out the problem. The fact that the show even exists, right? It's that someone out there, some part of this, big human computer, right, is still turning that problem over in their head, right?
Well,
And in this
you would-
situation,
you would know that's the case.
well, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that even in this story, it's something where, like, the fact that these kinds of barbaric things happened, those aren't the things that really surprise me. It's the fact that somehow humanity wasn't wiped out.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that there is still a humanity to try and do it better.
Yeah, it's the unrealistic, basically, aspect of it. It's that, like, we've run the numbers, guys. If we went to nuclear war, humanity would be wiped out.
Yeah,
there is no rebound from
the
that.
whole planet could be turned to dust probably
Yeah.
multiple times
Maybe in a million years, maybe.
over.
But no,
Yeah.
even then,
The
like,
fact that there was only 90 years of chaos afterwards, like the fact that it was a 13-day war
yeah,
could be that, 13 days was all it took before all of the cities were destroyed, and that is kind of what they implied here.
Yeah.
But the fact that, say, Brisbane, for instance, I've been to Brisbane, it's now, granted, this was written back in the 80s, right? So I don't know what Brisbane was like back then, but Brisbane is not a small city, right?
no, it's not. No, definitely not.
when they said that one was untouched, I was like, oh, that's actually surprising. Like I would have thought that one would have actually gotten wiped out too.
In this world line, Jacob, only 200 nukes were fired.
Exactly. There was still a billion people left,
Yeah.
right? Because
God.
if even half of the nuclear arsenal that just exists out there was used, humanity would be gone.
10
right?
times over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like that goes to show that even in this world line view of the future and everything of nuclear war breaking out,
Yeah.
it got to the point where at some point either people were killed too quickly to be able to keep launching nukes, or someone was like, no, we're not going to launch
just
anymore.
done.
We're done. We have drank our fill. 13 days. That's it. Why did we even do that? Why, oh God, why did we do this in the first place?
Yeah.
No more.
It also was something where they had homogenized the Earth down to two
Major factions.
major factions.
Which definitely does make it easier.
Well, it makes it easier, but it's also just one of those things of like, haha, yeah, sure. Yeah. Humanity homogenized into two factions.
Yeah, having two factions decide to be like, okay, we're going to stop now, right? Oh, okay, that's a lot easier than, a Mexican standoff of 100 entities, you know.
Or just even the fact that if there were two factions, there's a much higher likelihood that one just wins.
Sure, that too.
You know,
yeah.
But if you have like, you know, dozens of nations firing them all off there in weird alliances and sorts. No, they're
chain
just
reaction that doesn't stop.
Yeah, they're just entire sequences of nations and stuff and people groups that just don't exist anymore.
Right.
That's just.
And even if you put out the fires of hatred and war and stuff in one spot at one point in time, the fire will still come back. You know, like you can't get it all out at once.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh
boy.
I'm actually interested to see if the whole essence of what's going on in the present bit with the Alliance being forced to demilitarize and stuff ends up leading towards a peace act within the Empire that would lead to them demilitarizing. Because one of the things that we might have this bit of info there being important for is that Julian's point in the present bit of this whole legend is that he's going to basically lead the galaxy as a whole towards basically the removal of these terrifying basically weapons of technology and sorts. That we might even be able to slow down at the very least the whole speed at which we could just wipe ourselves out.
Yeah, slowing down is the key because you can't stop it.
Exactly.
Humans will always look for a big stick.
But given that Julian is basically becoming the student of history, I am hopeful for him and his future.
Right.
And thus, that's why since probably the beginning of the show, we've been like, Julian's the one that's going to last through everything. But most everyone else here, we all are going to die.
Right. The first ED made that rather poignant. Yeah.
It did. Yeah.
One of the other things I want to bring up here is that, and this is the only like super specific detail I want to bring up at this point, but when the Black Flag Force went up against the Space Force, right?
Yes.
They were outnumbered like 6,000 to like 15,000 or something like that, or 20,000, right? I think it might have been 6,000 to 20,000. Yeah.
6 to 20, yep.
Yeah, 6 to 20. So that's overwhelming advantage to the enemy, right? More than 3 to 1, almost 3.5 to 1, right? And they defeated them. Now, there were specific ways in which they defeated them. They sowed discord amongst the forces so that way they weren't truly coordinated. But also, there's something that I think was kind of implied here. Because the Space Force was the singular military force in like the known world at that time or across the known worlds at the time, they didn't actually have to be that good, right? They talked about like how there was all of this internal decay within like how the funds were used and things like that.
Right.
But it would also, stand to follow that it would also be as far as the capabilities of the individual officers and things like that, even if they were working together. And we've seen some of that kind of stuff, certainly in the old Empire, right? And the old Alliance, but we're seeing it also now, even in Reinhardt's new regime, because even like when with Ragnarok and when he fought Yang, right? He was still on top of things, right? But because he had distributed his officers, the really cream of the crop ones, out to the different segments of the fleets, the people that were under him weren't up to the task, right? They weren't horrible in most cases, right? But they couldn't quite cut it, right? Whereas in the case of Yang, because that's what all of it consolidated into one place, right? All of the best people right there, they were able to, quite frankly, cut Reinhardt to ribbons, right? Not as devastatingly as it probably was in this fight in the history bit here, but in that fight, it was almost 3.5 to 1, right? Yeah. So if we get on top of all of this, Ruintal starting to make power plays or things like that, the Church of Terra doing their thing, like, I feel like this is not just Church of Terra relevance, but it's also, this is what we have to look forward to with regards to Reinhardt's new empire.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Will it make it to 5 years?
I think that Reinhardt's probably got, depending on how they space out potential time skips and stuff like that.
Right, because we do need to see his glorious long hair.
I feel like things are more along the lines of a decade.
Gotcha.
More along.
I can see that. Yeah.
I think 5 years is a bit too pessimistic.
Bit too short.
Because he's won.
Yeah, he's won, and
if the Alliance demilitarizes, it still could take a generation, basically, before we end up even getting like to
Yes.
have anything to where they could even compete against Reinhardt.
Although if they managed to get those almost like, what was it, like 1,800 ships basically?
nothing.
Yeah, but that's still
nothing.
that's still something. It's not 60 ships, you know.
It's still basically nothing. Though.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's basically a band of merry men that can now actually occupy Sherwood Forest instead of
Right.
like pretending to be that.
Yeah. That's true.
So-
That's true.
Oh, guys, Legend of the Galactic Heroes, some heavy stuff, some really, really good things foreshadowed and set up here.
Yup.
Church of Terra, going
boy.
to Terra with Julian and Poplin. And yeah. Y'all, thank you so much for watching this episode's reaction and discussion. If you want to see the next episode's reaction and discussion right now, though, go check out the link in the description below for our Patreon. You can get on early access there. You can watch full-length timer reactions there, and all this comes with Discord access. So you can chat with us in the community there about this show, about anime in general, and also be sure to check out our Twitch channel.
Yes, we've got a Twitch channel, like he just said, just there. Information's in the description. Go check it out.
Yes, if any of that interests you, we'll see you there. But until then, we're Semblance of Sanity. I'm Caleb,
I'm Jacob.
and we'll see you all next time.